All right, so here we have Poe has logged in, and it's being stored in the session on the server. Let's demonstrate now what happens when you log out and you try to come back to a place where you're not supposed to be, right? So right now this logout is just navigating me back to the login page. It's not really logging me out, right? Because I can always go back to the profile page, refresh, and I'm still logged in. Right, so the only place where I can really log out is to notify the server to invalidate, right, that session object, that user that is stored in the session. Just invalidate that. Also invalidate whatever cookie I might have on the browser, and just notify that no longer recognize that cookie that I have in my browser session. Right. So let's do that. So let's refactor the login template. The login, the profile template. Currently, the logout button, it's really nothing more than just a URL that is navigating to the login. So let's not do that. Instead, let's replace this with a click that it's going to notify the controller that we are indeed logging out, right? And then in the controller, we'll need that event handler logout. Implemented in a function of the same name. There it is, logout. And we'll use the user service dot logout. Okay. All right, so let's log out. Hopefully, once we have successfully logged out, then we navigate to the login page, right? So this will be a then. And then we're going to navigate to the login page or the home page or whatever you decide where you want to go programmatically. Yes? All right, so let's implement the logout on the service side. So on the service, right, let's add a logout here. So log out, implemented logout right there. And we're going to do a var URL. So same thing here, but instead of check logged in, we'll do logout. And we'll do an HTTP dot post to the URL. And when it comes back, we're just going to just respond to the controller that it was successful. We're not expecting any data. We're expecting maybe a status, 200, that yes, you were successfully logged out. So on the server side, yes? What? Sure. Let's see, on the server side, we're going to be listening in for that logout, right? So as a post, and this is going to be logout, right? And implemented right here. So function logout request response, and just like there is this syntactic sugar is authenticated. Well, again, Passport adds some convenience functions for us for just logging out, right? So it's as easy as saying request.logout. I think it's lowercase. And so what this is going to do is going to remove the user from the session. It's going to invalidate it's going to clear out the session, and it's going to invalidate the cookie. So the cookie that you were using all along that hasn't yet timed out. Right, it's going to invalidate. Make sure that if anyone uses that same cookie, it will no longer be valid. Okay. So once we log out, we can just respond, send back status 200, saying yeah, we successfully logged you out. All right. So going back and restarting the server, if we refresh, notice that I restarted the server. And I reloaded the profile. And there's nobody logged in, right? Because we killed the server. Right? It has no recollection of anybody. Any cookie I had on the client, they are invalidated, right? They don't know. They're no longer recognized as valid cookies. Right? So let's try logging in. So let's do po log in. Let's refresh. Right, so we are in as Po. Now we're going to log out. Okay, so presumably we've logged out. Before, remember that we could go back to the profile, but no longer. Notice that if I refresh the profile, I don't have the user, right? It's no longer available on the server side, but it's still letting us navigate to the profile. Right? It's still letting us navigate to the profile, and what's happening is that we don't have data. Remember, we have two things that we need to deal with, right? The navigation, right, and we have to deal with the data, right? We have to invalidate the data, make sure that when you navigate, you don't have access to this data. So those two things need to be handled, and the navigation is on the server, on the client side, right? The navigation is on the client side, whereas the data is being handled on the server side. So to have more control and exactly configure what it is that we want to do, not only for the profile page, but anywhere that we want to protect. Right, we want to centralize the logic here, right? If you try to access a place that is you have to be logged in for, we always want to kick you out to the profile page. That's not it's not configured anywhere, right? We haven't told it what to do when you are when this promise cannot be resolved, right? Now, up to this point, we have tested the valid, the happy path, right? I have logged in, and so the promise has been resolved, and here's the data associated with that resolve, which is the currently logged in user, yes? We haven't yet decided what to do with the sad path, right? When the error path, when we get a 4.1 unauthorized, right? So to handle that, we're going to need to handle the resolve ourselves. Right now, we are returning this promise back to the resolve mechanism right here. So it's a resolve mechanism. It doesn't have enough syntax here to configure exactly what to do when things go wrong, right? So we need to handle that ourselves, right? So let's do that. Let's handle this ourselves. We'll handle the promise ourselves. Right, so what we're going to do here, what we're going to do is handle the promise ourselves. We're going to use the Q library. The Q library is it's a very common promise library. We are actually using that on the server. Right, if you remember, I think it was last week, we used the Q promise to configure Mongoose. Right, we configured Mongoose saying, "Hey Mongoose," I don't know if you remember, it was giving us an error on that the promise library was deprecated, that Mongoose was using a deprecated Q promise library. So we overrode it and say, no, use this Q library instead, right? Q promise library. So we're going to use it. There's an equivalent client-side version, right? So there's a server version, which is the one we're using in Mongoose. And on the client side, we have the exact same library, the same exact API, the same exact behavior. So the way it works, we're going to create a deferred object from the Q library. We say q.defer, and this is going to be the asynchronous call, right? Meaning the thread is going to pass right through. Right? It's going to create the AJAX call. It's not going to wait for it. It's going to continue. So whoever's waiting for a response, right, whoever's waiting for a response for this function, they're expecting a promise. But we're not going to use their promise. We're not going to use this promise. That's what we were using 2 minutes ago. We want to have more fine control over what happens with the promise. When to resolve it, when to reject it. So here we're going to return the promise. That's what they're expecting, right? Upstream. So return the promise. Right? And the promise, remember, the only thing the promise is an object that has a function called then, right? That's going to allow whoever's waiting for this to register a callback with us. Meaning that at some point, when we resolve the promise, meaning we fulfill the promise, then that function will be invoked, right? So let's handle that. So here's how we're going to handle it. So this is the promise. Remember, this function, the check logged in, is an asynchronous call, which returns a promise, and there we go. We are registering a callback right here. which is going to allow us to handle the happy path right here. This is the response that comes in from the server. And we know that the user might be here in the data, or 0. Remember, right? If it's 0, or the currently logged in user is here, right? So we're going to check to see var current user supposedly is here in the response.data. It could be the actual user, right? Or it could be 0. So if it's 0, we want to check to see. We want to handle it. If it is 0, we would like to fail this. It says, no, the user is not logged in. Okay, and we're going to reject the promise. Right? We're going to say, nope, sorry, the promise has failed. Or otherwise, if it's not 0, then it could only be the actual object that came from the server. So here we're gonna resolve and say, yep, good. The deferred object we're gonna resolve, and the object that you're gonna get, in the function, in the callback function, is the actual current user. So this is what was happening behind the scenes. So this is what was happening behind the scenes, right? When we returned the promise, this is what was happening. But now we're doing it ourselves because we want to treat the sad path, not the happy path. We want to treat it specifically. We want to first reject the promise. Okay, but then we want to decide what to do, the navigational part, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to decide to navigate. So we're going to need the location library here, location. And we're going to decide that we want to navigate to, explicitly navigate to the login page. Okay? So here's where we're deciding what to do with the failed attempt at navigating a place where you're not supposed to go. Right? So let's try this out, see if we broke it. Console ID. Do we log in? Source, the config is here. Let's see if this works. Let's go here. Let's refresh. Okay, it is 0. The response. Oh, I guess. Oh, all right. So it's not embedded. That's weird. I guess you get to. Oh, because we unwrapped it in the check logged in, right? We unwrapped it over there. Okay, we're getting the actual piece of information here. So current user right here. So we don't need to unwrap it. We already did in check logged in. So let's do that again. Okay, so we have 0. And notice that it's going to reject it, right? Because the current user is 0. And it's going to hopefully navigate us to the login page. So it kicks us back to the login page. So if I try to navigate now to the profile page, right, it's still going to go to that 0. There's nobody logged in, and it's kicking me out back to the login page. So in effect, we have protected the profile page, right? Only if I successfully log in, right, does it go to the profile page, right? But if I log out, right, and I try to navigate back to the profile page, notice that it's kicking me back to the login page. Okay. Now. Notice that we are doing the navigation on the client side, right? And anything you do on the client side is not, it's not very secure, right? You could thwart the client side to let you navigate to the profile nevertheless, okay? Since the code is right there, right? You could do some JavaScript injection and override the code that's running on your browser. Anything you try to do to secure on the client side it always has to be backed up by some server-side code. Yes?
Can you explain again the purpose of using the Q promise library here? Like, I don't understand why we use it.
The only reason we're using the Q library is because we want to have more granular control of what happens in the reject side, right? Just because we needed that one extra line of code. Before it was just being rejected, right? Meaning, yes, you were navigating there, just because that was the configuration of the when, right, in the routing mechanism. It's just that you weren't getting any data. You were getting 0, right? And then the profile didn't know what to do with the 0, right? So we could have handled it there, right? And the profile controller could have said, I don't have a user. Let me kick you out to a login page. Right? We could have done that, but then you would have to do the same thing for the website, for the pages, right? So so that logic would be repeated in many different places. So this is a one place where you can put in one single place. Yes.
Instead of returning 0, you would send the for1 status unauthorized. So you get back the user or the status of unauthorized. You just return the promise from the server instead of using the key library. Without unwrapping the promise. So technically, you would just return the promise from the server to the controller, and then the controller.
Well, the promise on the server it doesn't get passed on to the client, right? The client is the one who's it's only an abstraction on top of the AJAX layer, right? On the client side, right? So the client side doesn't know anything about promises on the server, right? It just receives a response, an asynchronous response from the server. It is the client who's wrapping this abstraction of I'll call you back at some point later when I get a response, right? It is the same exact API on the client and the server. It uses the same API, but it's not that you have a promise from the server being passed over to a promise on the client. Okay?
So if we just call that line that redirects us in a normal promise, it would execute it quickly, and it would redirect us to the profile page first, and then.
Yeah, you would see the profile page maybe flash real quick, right, and then kick you back to the login page, right? Now what allows us to do here is that now we have a one single mechanism of configuring this, right? And if we want to apply the same exact protection to another page, we can just copy this, right, and go to maybe the websites, or paste it on website new, or paste it on each one of these. That means now that you can't navigate to any of those, right, unless you're logged in. Okay, so this says I'll resolve it, and you can continue going wherever you were going, right, wherever you wanted to go. But if you're not logged in, I'll always kick you back to the login page. So we have a one single place where it's configured, as opposed to having it configured in each one of the controllers. Right, we have one single place of maintenance. Is that? All right, so let's have that, and let's continue. So the next thing we would like to be able to do is, what about when you register, right? When you register, ideally, it would be the case that not only is the user created brand new, which we already have, right, but you navigate to the profile page again with no necessity for the new user ID. But that should also be notified to the Passport infrastructure that this is the currently logged in user. Brand new user, this is the currently logged in user. So let's do that next.